How can a silly joke at a vow renewal explode into a lawful ending of a marriage? What happens when a wife mocks her husband in front of cameras, and the husband responds with quiet records and a public service of papers? Can a woman who insists it was just a prank survive the moment when consequences arrive in daylight? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Evaden Pell, and I swear it was supposed to be funny. Everyone kept saying our vow renewal needed a spark, so I thought, why not make it viral? My ex Cade offered to walk me down the aisle as a joke. I said yes. Mason, my husband, said it was strange, but I told him to relax. People love irony, right? It happened in front of everyone, our families, co-workers, even Piper holding the little bouquet. The music started, Cade took my arm, and the whole hall laughed. Someone shouted, "Iconic!" and phones went up. Mason stood at the end of the aisle, smiling that small, careful smile. I thought he was being dramatic when he barely clapped after. Afterward, I posted the clip with the caption, "Modern love needs a sense of humor." It got thousands of views. I felt untouchable. My mother said it showed confidence, that women today should never apologize for being bold. I believed her, but Mason stopped talking much. He moved his work desk into the guest room. Sometimes I'd hear a printer at night. I assumed he was sulking. I didn't know those quiet nights were him collecting everything. Every joke, every video, every word. The morning after I announced my big idea, the kitchen felt too bright. Mason sat at the table with his coffee, reading something on his phone. I told him my plan again, trying to sound breezy. I said the vow renewal needed a twist, and that everyone would love it if Cade walked me down the aisle as a harmless joke. He didn't look up right away. Then he asked if I was serious. I laughed and said, "It's not that deep." He said it should be. I told him people do stranger things for content, that it would make our day memorable. He said he wanted it memorable for the right reasons. I told him that kind of thinking was old-fashioned. He didn't argue. He just folded his napkin neatly and said he trusted I'd make the right decision. His tone was so calm it almost made me angry. I said, "You sound like a teacher scolding a child." He said, "You sound like someone trying to make a point instead of a promise." That line stung more than I wanted it to. I changed the subject, asked if he'd pick up dry cleaning later. He said sure. Then he took his mug and rinsed it quietly. I noticed he set it on the opposite side of the counter from mine. Separate corners, two worlds. When he left for work, I saw his phone on the counter light up with a calendar alert. Downtown, 11:20 a.m. I assumed it was another meeting. Still, something about the time being so specific stayed in my mind. In the bedroom, I checked my own phone. Cade had sent a message. "Still up for our walk?" I grinned and typed back, "Of course." He replied with a heart emoji. I deleted the thread before Mason could see it. Later that day, my mother called. She said Mason had always been too serious and that I should do what made me happy. "Men forget fun after marriage," she said. "Remind him who he married." That made me feel justified again, like I was doing something brave. That evening, Mason came home early. I thought it was sweet at first, until I realized he'd moved some of his files into the guest room. I asked why, and he said the light was better there. I said, "You mean you just don't want to be near me while I'm planning?" He said nothing. I told him he was being dramatic. He said, "You call everything drama when you don't want to see how it looks." I laughed and said he should write poetry, if he liked lines like that. He smiled a little, tiredly, and said, "I already do. It's called patience." Before bed, I tried to joke with him again, said he should relax and just enjoy being married to a woman who could make a crowd laugh. He said, "Crowds laugh for many reasons, not all of them kind." I brushed it off, called him sensitive. When I turned off the light, he stayed in the hallway. I heard the faint sound of his phone typing, maybe texting someone. Then a door latch clicked. The guest room. I couldn't sleep. I opened my phone again. Cade had posted a photo from his rehearsal space with the caption, "Big weekend for someone." I felt a rush of excitement, a kind of thrill that Mason hadn't given me in years. In the morning, Mason had already left. The bed on his side was perfectly smooth. On the kitchen counter were 2 mugs again, his spotless, mine half full and cold. I told myself he'd come around. That once the day came, he'd laugh too. That maybe the crowd's energy would fix everything, but a part of me noticed things. How he'd started saving receipts. How his laptop always shut when I entered the room. How a faint smell of printer toner lingered at night. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. When Cade texted again, asking if Mason was okay with the joke, I replied, "He'll live." That evening, Mason came home, hung his jacket neatly, and asked if I'd finalized the guest list. I said yes. He nodded, checked something on his phone, and left it on the counter. For a moment, I saw a reminder flash. Meeting personal. I asked what that was. He said, "Just something I need to follow up on." I teased, "So secretive lately." He said, "No secrets, just structure." I rolled my eyes, said he sounded like a machine. He said, "Better a machine than a spectacle." I told him he didn't understand modern love. He said, "I understand vows." That shut me up. He didn't raise his voice or slam anything. He just walked into the guest room again, closing the door softly. I checked his mug later. It was gone from the counter. I wondered if he'd started keeping it separate on purpose. I sat down, opened my phone, and posted a story. You can't be too serious in life, laugh through everything. The post got hearts instantly. Someone commented, "Can't wait to see the aisle moment." I felt electric. Still, I noticed one small thing when I looked at Mason's desk as I passed by that night. The drawer had been locked. I tugged at it once and it didn't move. I heard a faint click, like something being sealed. I told myself I didn't care. He could keep his little secrets. I had mine. Then, just before I went to bed, I heard a faint vibration from his phone left on the dresser. I glanced down. A text preview appeared from an unknown number. "Confirmed for downtown 11:20. Documents ready." I blinked, confused, then dismissed the screen. He came out of the guest room right then, saw me near the dresser. I said I was just checking the time. He said nothing, just looked at the phone, then back at me, and quietly placed it in his pocket. I felt oddly defensive, even though he hadn't accused me of anything. I said, "You act like I can't even stand near your stuff." He said, "You can stand wherever you want. I just don't want to give you another thing to make a joke about." I said, "That's not fair." He said, "Neither was that plan." Then he walked away again. When the door closed, I stared at the space he'd left, telling myself he was overreacting. I opened my phone one more time. Cade had sent a message. "You sure he's fine with this? Don't want it to blow up your life." I laughed out loud and typed back, "It's a joke, not a bomb." But even as I sent it, I heard that faint mechanical sound again from the guest room. A printer waking up. At work the next morning, I could feel everyone whispering before I even sat down. I'd posted another teaser from the rehearsal, Cade and me laughing under fairy lights, his hand dramatically offering me his arm. The caption said, "Even exes can have good timing." It was supposed to be cheeky, but apparently not everyone saw it that way. By 10, Mr. Caro, my manager, called me into his glass office. He said we needed to discuss personal content affecting brand image. I almost laughed. I told him it was my private life, not company business. He said the co-working space's social page had been tagged in a few comments about the video. He said clients might think it was unprofessional. I told him it was humor, a cultural reset, something harmless. Through the glass, I could see 2 co-workers scrolling on their phones, glancing up at me. I knew exactly what they were watching. I said to Mr. Caro, "Everyone's too sensitive these days." He said, Some people call that accountability. I said, some people call it boredom. He sighed and told me to take the afternoon to cool off. When I got back to my desk, a few people were smiling in that quiet, uncomfortable way. One of them whispered, "That's her." I pretended not to hear. I sent a message to Mason saying people were overreacting. He didn't reply. 10 minutes later, I got an automated email from our joint account. He'd changed the password. I texted him, "Why would you do that?" He wrote back, "Just organizing." The word again, organizing. He used it lately like it meant something else. I scrolled through my notifications. A private number had called twice that morning. I didn't recognize it. Then, another ping. Cade had tagged me in a story. It showed him standing on a mock aisle, captioned, "Big rehearsal energy." I reshared it with a wink emoji. At lunch, I met my mother. She was thrilled. She said the video made me look radiant. "You always were good at holding attention," she said. I told her Mason didn't see it that way. She said, "Men hate it when they stop being the main character." That line stuck with me. When I got home that evening, Mason was already there. He was in the guest room again, door half open. I could hear the low murmur of a call, maybe through headphones. He said words like statement, timeline, and follow-up. I stood there, trying to listen. The hum of the printer started again. I pushed the door slightly. He turned, startled but not angry, and said he was finishing some work. I told him he'd been finishing work every night this week. He said, "Someone has to." I said, "You make me sound useless." He said, "Not useless, loud." That cut deeper than I let show. I told him people liked me because I wasn't afraid to live. He said, "They don't have to live with you." I called him bitter. He said, "Call it what you want." When he left the room, I noticed his laptop screen before it dimmed. There was a spreadsheet open with names and dates. I caught words like expenses and events. I asked what it was. He said, "Just records." I said, "You're not that kind of person." He said, "You didn't think you were this kind either." Then he went to bed in the guest room again. That night, I opened the group chat with my friends, showing them clips from rehearsal. Everyone was laughing, calling me bold, modern, unforgettable. I sent a selfie of me holding the script for the vows. Someone commented, "Your husband's face, though, priceless." I replied, "He'll laugh later." When I looked up, Mason was in the hallway. He'd heard the notification sounds. He asked, "Still planning?" I said, "It's content, not planning." He said, "It's not marriage either." He walked into the kitchen, opened a cabinet, and took out a new mug, plain white, different from our matching set. He poured coffee into it and didn't use mine. I said, "You're being petty." He said, "I'm being separate." I told him that made no sense. He said, "It will." The next day, I arrived at work to find another note from HR. "Please refrain from personal postings during office hours." It was humiliating. I felt cornered. I went outside and called Cade. He said everyone was talking about the clip and that we'd gone viral. I told him Mason was taking it too personally. Cade said, "He'll get over it. They always do." That night, I tried to be gentle. I made dinner, lit candles, tried to start a calm conversation. I told Mason we could fix things if he'd stop acting like I'd committed a crime. He said, "You humiliated me." I said, "It was a moment of fun." He said, "It was a choice." I told him he should be proud that his wife was confident. He said, "Confidence without respect was noise." I rolled my eyes, said he was dramatic. He said, "Maybe I am. That's what people remember, right? Drama." I tried to touch his arm. He stepped back slightly. He didn't say anything cruel, but the space he left felt like punishment. When he went to bed early, I checked the counter again. His mug was rinsed, turned upside down, lined perfectly beside the sink. Mine was still full of cold tea. I sat alone at the table, scrolling through the comments under my post. Some were laughing. Others called me disrespectful. One said, "Poor guy, he looks done." I wanted to delete it, but didn't. Instead, I typed another caption draft. "If you can't handle a joke, maybe you're the punchline." I didn't post it. Around midnight, I heard the printer again. I got up, tiptoed toward the sound. It wasn't printing anything visible, just humming. Maybe he was scanning. The light from the guest room spilled into the hallway. I pushed the door open slightly. On the desk were 3 binders: home, auto, bank. Another thinner one labeled utilities sat under a USB drive taped to a folder marked taxes. I froze. That wasn't work stuff. I whispered his name, but he didn't hear me. He had headphones on, saying something like, "Everything should be ready by next week." I closed the door quietly, my heart pounding. The next morning, he left earlier than usual. On the fridge was a note. "Breakfast in the oven. Meeting. Personal." I laughed bitterly, tore the note in half, and tossed it out. Then I checked my phone. Cade had sent another message. "Hope your man's cool. Don't want to end up in trouble." I replied, "He's fine, just acting like an accountant of emotions." He sent a laughing emoji. When I arrived at work, the office printer beeped again. It spit out a half page that wasn't mine, just a blank with the header "Statement." I stood there staring at it. Something about that word followed me home that night, like an echo. When I got in, Mason was sitting at the kitchen table. I asked if we were okay. He said, "We will be." I said, "You don't sound sure." He said, "I am. I just have steps to follow." Before I could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed with a notification. I caught the words, "File uploaded successfully." He locked it and said, "Work stuff." That night when he went to bed, I lay awake, staring at the dark. For the first time, I couldn't tell if he was planning to forgive me or something else. In the silence, I heard it again. The faint hum of the printer starting up. The vow renewal was supposed to fix everything. I told myself it would make us laugh again, that once Mason saw the crowd smiling, he'd finally understand my kind of love. Public, playful, a little reckless. The community hall was bright and decorated with cheap gold drapes. My mother had picked the playlist. Cade was already there, leaning against the wall, guitar slung over his shoulder. He looked too comfortable. Mason was helping the caterers, quiet and efficient, avoiding cameras. I teased him that he could at least pretend to enjoy himself. He said he was fine. He always said that. When the music started, everyone turned toward the aisle. I stood at the entrance, pretending to wait for a cue. Then Cade stepped forward, grinning, offering his arm. A few guests clapped before I even took it. Someone shouted, "Iconic!" and phones lifted. I saw the tiny red lights blinking, recording. Mason's expression didn't change. I thought he was just stunned. I leaned in and whispered to Cade, "Let's make it funny." He said, "Already is." We walked together while laughter rippled through the room. Greta was beaming. Arthur looked at the floor. When we reached the front, Cade kissed my hand with a flourish, and everyone cheered. Mason didn't move. He just stared at the space between us. The officiant tried to keep it going, asked us to exchange vows. I recited mine with exaggerated emotion, making people laugh again. I even looked at Mason and said, "See, everyone loves a story." He said quietly, "This isn't one." After the vows, we all went upstairs to the rooftop bar. Someone played clips from the ceremony already posted online. They were captioned, "When your husband's too chill to care." I laughed too loudly. Mason stood by the railing, watching the skyline. Cade came over with 2 drinks and said, "You're trending locally." I said, "Told you it'd work." He asked if Mason was mad. I said, "He'll get over it." When I went to Mason, I tried to joke. I told him the internet loved him for being stoic. He said, "They can have me." I asked what that meant, but he didn't answer. A group of friends raised their glasses and shouted, "Toast to better men." I smiled reflexively. But the words hit wrong. Mason didn't join the toast. He just turned his phone face down on the table. A small calendar notification flashed before he covered it. Downtown 3:45 p.m. Tomorrow. I asked if he was leaving town. He said, "No, just handling something." I said, "You love your little secrets." He said, "I just learned from you." Someone took a group photo. I was in the middle, laughing, holding my glass high. Mason wasn't even in the frame. When we got home that night, I was still buzzing. I told him he should admit it was funny. He said, "Do you know how small I felt?" I said, "It was harmless." He said, "To you." I told him people respected couples who could laugh at themselves. He said, "You laughed at me, not with me." He started clearing glasses from the counter while I scrolled through comments. One said, "Her husband looks like a prop." I didn't show him. He asked if I'd talked to Cade after the party. I said, "Obviously, we're friends." He said, "You've used that word for a lot of things lately." I accused him of being jealous. He said, "I'm disappointed." I told him disappointment was a choice. He said, "So is dignity." I didn't know what to say to that, so I stormed off. Later, from the hallway, I heard the soft whir of the printer again. It sounded steady, almost rhythmic. I pushed the door open. He was sitting at the desk, typing something. A USB stick was on the table beside his phone. I asked what he was printing. He said, "Notes." I asked if they were about me. He said, "About us." The next day, videos of the joke aisle were everywhere. One clip got thousands of views overnight. Someone had slowed down the part where Mason's face stayed still, while Cade dipped me dramatically. The caption said, "When the groom looks like he wants to disappear." At work, a coworker stopped me at the elevator and said, "You're all over my feed." I smiled tightly, pretending it didn't sting. Mr. Caro gave me another quick word about professionalism. I nodded and said it was just a phase of attention. He said, "Attention is a currency that devalues fast." That night, Mason didn't come home right after work. I called him twice, no answer. When he did arrive, he looked exhausted but calm. I told him I was worried. He said, "Don't be, I'm just preparing." I asked, "For what?" He said, "For later." He ate quietly, no conversation. I tried to provoke him, asked if he planned to sleep in the guest room forever. He said, "As long as I need to." When I leaned on the counter and asked if he still loved me, he looked at me for a long time before saying, "Love isn't a performance." I said, "Then you're bad at it." He said, "Or you've mistaken the audience for the partner." I told him he always made everything sound like a thesis. He said, "At least I study before I speak." He washed his plate, dried it, and placed it beside the sink. Then he took his phone, typed something quickly, and a faint notification tone sounded, "File, uploaded successfully." He turned off the screen before I could see. I followed him down the hallway, asking what he was doing. He said, "Putting things in order." I said, "You make it sound like I've done something criminal." He said, "Some things don't need police to have consequences." I told him he was trying to scare me. He said, "No, you don't scare until you lose control." He closed the door of the guest room again. The light under it glowed pale blue from his monitor. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my feed, forcing myself to laugh at the comments. Some called me brave, others cruel. My mother texted, "Ignore the jealous ones." I typed back, "I'm fine." But when I looked at the apartment, his mug lined up perfectly, the binders on the shelf, the faint smell of toner, I felt something shift. I opened my messages with Cade and typed, "He's acting weird, like planning something." Cade replied, "Maybe he's finally leaving." I stared at that line for a long time before deleting it. When I went to bed, Mason was still awake in the guest room. The printer gave one last soft beep before it went silent. In the dark, I realized the laughter from the party had stopped echoing in my head. All I could hear now was that quiet mechanical hum steady as breathing, as if it belonged to something waiting. By the next weekend, everything online had settled into mockery. The clip of Cade walking me down the aisle was everywhere, cropped, edited, looped with captions like, "When she jokes, but he stopped smiling." I kept trying to laugh along, replying with laughing emojis or "can't take a joke" comments, but each post got colder replies. Mason didn't react to any of it. He just carried on quietly, as if the noise didn't touch him. That silence made me angrier than insults would have. My mother insisted we all meet for lunch, said it would show stability. I invited Mason, thinking it could be a truce. He agreed immediately, which somehow unnerved me. At the family restaurant, everyone sat around the long table. Mason arrived neatly dressed, on time, holding Piper's hand. She ran to me first, still innocent enough to hug without hesitation. Mason sat opposite me, calm, his phone face down beside his plate. Greta started the conversation by saying the video had brought everyone attention. Arthur mumbled that attention wasn't always good. Mason just smiled politely. Naomi arrived halfway through. She hugged Mason first, not me. Then she sat beside him and asked softly, "You okay?" He nodded. I hated the pity in her tone. Greta tried to lighten the mood, saying, "At least it's gone viral. People can't stop talking." Naomi said, "They're not laughing with you." I snapped that people today exaggerate everything. Mason said, "They only see what you give them." I told him he sounded rehearsed. He said, "Maybe I'm learning from you." Arthur coughed awkwardly. Piper stared between us and asked, "Mummy, why was Mr. Cade holding your hand on TV?" The entire table went still. I forced a laugh and said, "It was just a joke, baby." Piper frowned. "Daddy didn't laugh," she said quietly. Mason reached over and tucked her hair behind her ear, still saying nothing. Greta scolded her for repeating gossip. Naomi said, "Children repeat what they see." I wanted to throw something at her. Instead, I smiled tight and said, "You all need to stop taking things so literally." Naomi leaned back and said, "You're the only one who thinks it's still funny." I turned to Mason, begging with my eyes for him to defend me. He didn't. He just said, "Let's finish eating." When the check came, he paid without hesitation. I told him he didn't have to, but he said, "It keeps things simple." His tone was calm, too calm. Outside the restaurant, Piper tugged my sleeve. She asked, "Are you and Daddy still married?" I laughed too fast, said, "Of course." She said, "Because everyone online said you embarrassed him." I froze. Mason knelt down, looked her in the eyes and said, "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." She nodded slowly, as if she already knew that wasn't the whole story. The ride home was silent except for Piper, humming softly in the back seat. I tried to make small talk. Mason answered in short sentences. When we stopped at the light, I saw a clipboard on the passenger seat beside him. The top page only had one word printed in bold, statement. I asked what it was. He said, "Notes." At home, he carried the folder straight into the guest room. I followed him, demanding to know what he was doing. He said, "Just organizing things." I said, "You've been organizing for weeks." He said, "Then it'll be done soon." I accused him of trying to scare me. He said, "I'm past trying." I said, "So what? You're leaving." He said, "I'm preparing." I told him he sounded like a lawyer. He said, "I sound like someone tired of jokes." Later, he packed a small bag for Piper, her overnight clothes, toothbrush, and favorite stuffed bear. He told me she'd spend the night with Naomi. I asked why. He said, "She deserves quiet." When they left, I sat on the couch surrounded by silence and half-drunk glasses of wine. I opened my phone, scrolling through the videos again. The comment section had turned brutal. Some people said Mason was a saint. Others called me cruel. I deleted a few posts, but couldn't stop myself from reading more. Around 10, I saw a message from Cade. "Still holding up? Wild how serious everyone's getting. I replied, "They don't get humor anymore." He wrote, "Your man looks like he's planning something." I stared at that line for a long time before deleting it. The next morning, Mason brought Piper home early. She ran to her room while he stood at the door, polite but distant. I tried to joke that she probably told Naomi everything. He said, "She only tells the truth." He walked past me into the kitchen, poured himself coffee into that plain white mug again. I noticed he'd added a new key to his ring, small and silver, not one I recognized. I asked what it was for. He said, "It keeps things separate." I laughed nervously. "Separate how?" He said, "You'll see." He went into the guest room again. I followed, angrier now. "You think you can just ignore me?" I said. He said, "I'm not ignoring you. I'm focusing." On his desk were more folders. I saw labels now: home, auto, bank, and utilities. The utilities one looked thicker than the rest. A USB drive sat under a folder marked taxes. I said, "You're turning into an accountant of feelings." He said, "No, just cleaning up after them." I tried to sound bold again, told him he couldn't punish me forever. He said, "I'm not punishing you, I'm documenting." I didn't understand then how calm could be so frightening. That night, I found him on the balcony, watching the city. The printer light blinked behind him through the glass. I said I wanted to talk. He said, "You always do when it's too late." I said, "So what now?" He looked at me for a moment, then said, "I'll handle this properly." That word again, properly, like a sentence, not a plan. When he went inside, I stayed on the balcony. The air was cold, the hum of the printer faint but steady. A moment later, his phone alarm went off inside the apartment. I peeked in and saw the screen light up. Downtown 2:05 p.m. He silenced it without a word. That was the first time I felt something like panic. Not because he was angry, but because he wasn't anymore. That night, I tried to act normal. I cooked dinner, poured him a glass of wine, and told him we could start fresh. He didn't answer. He sat at the table with his white mug, not even touching the food. I told him I was tired of walking on eggshells. He said, "You're the one who dropped them." I said he was still holding a grudge over something that was supposed to be funny. He said, "That's the problem. You think pain is comedy." I snapped that he was being melodramatic. He said, "No, just awake." I slammed my fork down and said, "Do you even love me anymore?" He said, "I did, but love needs trust to stay alive." The calm in his voice scared me more than shouting would have. After dinner, he cleared the plates quietly. I followed him to the sink, trying to provoke some kind of reaction. I said, "Everyone makes mistakes. It's not like I cheated." He said, "You turned our vows into a prop." I said, "You take things too literally." He said, "And you take nothing seriously." He dried his hands and left the room. I heard the soft click of the guest room door locking. I stood there for a long time, listening. Then came the sound again. The low hum of the printer. The rhythm of it made my stomach twist. I pushed open the door. He was sitting at the desk, headphones on, speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Yes, follow-up confirmed. I'll bring forms tomorrow." I asked who he was talking to. He removed one earphone and said, "Work." I said, "You're lying." He said, "You should try it less often. It's exhausting." I told him I didn't like the secrecy. He said, "That's rich." He turned back to the computer. I noticed the screen this time. A neat desktop labeled Archive A and Archive B. A folder was open, showing subfolders named with dates. My name was in one of them. I asked what he was saving. He said, "Records." I said, "Of what?" He said, "Behavior." I laughed, tried to make it sound light. "You make it sound like a crime scene." He said, "Sometimes silence is evidence." I stepped closer, furious. "Delete that." He said, "No." The printer spat out a page. I grabbed it. It was blank. I said, "You're printing nothing." He said, "Exactly." I threw it on the floor, shouted that he was insane. He didn't raise his voice once. He just looked at me and said, "I'll handle this properly." That word again, properly, cutting and calm. He turned back to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small key. He locked it with a soft click. I stormed out, shaking. In the morning, the house was too quiet. Piper had stayed with Naomi again. Mason left early. The guest room door was slightly open, but the desk was empty, drawers neatly closed. On the counter sat 2 mugs. His washed, mine with yesterday's lipstick ring. Beside them was a sticky note. "Bring forms." I crumpled it and threw it away. Around noon, my mother called. She said she'd seen another version of the video circulating, one where the caption read, "When she replaces her father with her ex." I told her people online were cruel. She said, "Ignore them. Mason will calm down. Men always do if you wait." I said, "He's not angry anymore." She paused. "Then you should worry." That afternoon, I went to his workplace, pretending to bring him lunch. The receptionist said he was out for a personal appointment. Downtown. I didn't ask for the time, but I knew. When he got home that evening, I asked where he'd gone. He said, "I told you, downtown." I asked what for. He said, "To follow up." I said, "On what?" He said, "On closure." He went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out a folder from inside. Actually hidden between food containers. I stared, speechless. He said, "Don't touch that." I said, "You're hiding things in the fridge now." He said, "It's cool and quiet in there. 2 things this house isn't." I told him he was becoming someone else. He said, "No, I'm remembering who I was before the noise." He started sorting through the papers in the folder, flipping methodically. I saw neat columns of handwriting, dates, short notes, probably about me. I reached for one, but he placed his hand over it. I said, "This is cruel." He said, "Truth always feels that way to liars." I went to the balcony, shaking with anger, then with something like fear. Through the glass door, I could see him tap a small USB into his laptop. A notification flashed briefly. File uploaded successfully. I shouted through the door, "What are you doing?" He said, "Backing up." He looked out at me then, not angry, not cold, just sure. That night I couldn't sleep. I heard him moving around, organizing, the occasional low beep of his phone. Once, I thought I heard a faint shredder sound. At some point, I got up and checked his keyring left on the table. There was a new one. Silver, small, not for any door in the apartment. I tried it on the guest room, the balcony, the cabinet. None fit. The next day, he was gone before sunrise. On the fridge, another note. Downtown, 1:25 p.m. I went through his drawers, his laptop bag, everything. Inside one pocket was a USB, labeled with yesterday's date. I held it for a long time, wondering if I should plug it in. I didn't. At noon, Naomi called, said Mason had dropped Piper's school schedule off with her. For clarity. I asked what that meant. She said, "You'll find out soon." Then she hung up. I texted Mason, "We need to talk." No reply. I texted again, "Are you meeting someone?" A minute later, his response came, "Yes, myself." That night, he came home late. He didn't look tired. He looked finished. I said, "You can't just keep treating me like a stranger." He said, "I'm treating you like someone who taught me a hard lesson." I said, "Which is?" He said, "That silence has value." He went into the guest room again. I followed. The binders were all gone now, replaced by a single thick envelope on the desk. I asked what it was. He said, "Final steps." I said, "You're scaring me." He said, "Good. Fear might keep you still long enough to understand." I told him he was cruel. He said, "No, I'm proper." He gathered the envelope, put it into his briefcase, and shut it gently. Then he looked at me and said, Tomorrow I'll make this official. I said, official how? He said, you'll see. I tried to grab his arm, but he stepped back. He said, you like an audience, you'll get one. He left me standing there. That night, I poured myself another glass of wine and stared at the dark skyline. My reflection in the window looked like someone else entirely. Smug, then small, then scared. I picked up my phone to text Cade, but stopped. What could I even say? My husband is documenting me. It sounded paranoid. Instead, I opened the video of the aisle again. This time, I couldn't laugh. I paused at Mason's face, that stillness. For the first time, I saw not embarrassment, not coldness, just detachment. The kind of look you give something you've already decided to let go. My mother called again, asking if I'd made peace. I told her Mason was being distant. She said, you probably bruised his pride. Let it blow over. I said, it's not blowing over. It's building. After we hung up, I sat on the couch, the sound of the printer faint again. I walked to the guest room. The light was off, but the machine was still humming. I whispered, what are you printing? His voice came from the dark. Nothing. It's done. I said, what's done? He said, the noise. The hum stopped. He came out then, brushing past me. His calmness made my skin crawl. I asked again, what are you planning? He said, something proper. I shouted after him, you can't just erase me. He stopped at the doorway, looked back once and said, you did that yourself. He left the room, the faint jingle of his keys the only sound. I noticed the new silver one missing from the ring. When I went to bed, I heard the balcony door slide open, then close. In the dark, I could still smell toner and paper, sharp and dry. I fell asleep, wondering what official meant, what proper would look like, and whether he'd finally say what he'd been preparing all along. I didn't know the answer was already waiting for me in daylight. The next morning started too quiet. I woke up alone, the guest room empty, sheets smooth, his white mug gone from the counter. The fridge hummed softly, but the sticky note I half expected to see wasn't there. I told myself he was just at work early, or maybe out for another downtown errand. I tried to believe it, but my stomach already knew something was different. Piper's laughter floated faintly from her room. She was FaceTiming Naomi. I heard her say, Daddy said we might move soon. My heart dropped. I stepped into the hall and asked who told her that. She said, he did. He said maybe we'll have 2 homes like my friend Ellie. I said, he's joking. She shrugged, the way kids do when they've already decided not to believe you. After dropping her at school, I drove toward Mason's office. My hands kept clenching around the steering wheel. When I arrived, the receptionist looked nervous. She said Mason wasn't in, that he had personal time today. I asked where. She said he didn't say. I sat in the parking lot, scrolling through my phone, trying to think of where he could be. My messages showed no replies. His chat thread name had changed to just a single white dot. My chest tightened. Then my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I answered too fast. Mrs. Pell, a calm male voice asked. We're looking for you. You're listed as a contact for Mr. Mason Pell. My mouth went dry. What's this about? Nothing urgent, the voice said. He asked that we confirm delivery with you present. Are you nearby? Delivery of what? Just documents. I told them to wait. I was coming. The address he gave was the Civic Plaza downtown, right next to the courthouse. When I got there, Mason was already standing under the wide glass awning. He looked immaculate, composed, holding a slim folder. He saw me but didn't wave. I walked up, heart pounding, trying to sound calm. What is this? I asked. He said, final steps. A man in a grey jacket approached us. Mrs. Pell, he said. I nodded. He handed me a large envelope. I tried to ask what it was, but Mason said quietly, just open it. I tore it open. The first page said, petition for dissolution of marriage in bold letters. My hands trembled. I looked at him. You filed for divorce? I said. He nodded once. Properly. The word hit like a slap. I said, You're joking. He said, No, you were the one who joked. People were walking past us, glancing curiously at the scene, the woman clutching papers, the man standing calm beside her. My face burned. I said, You're humiliating me in public. He said, No, I'm giving you what you asked for. Attention. I looked down at the papers again. Attached were temporary financial orders, shared custody arrangements, even an inventory of property. Everything was already filled out neatly. The organization was terrifying in its quietness. You planned this for weeks, I said. He said, Since the day you made a mockery of our vows. I tried to step closer, but he took a small step back. Not dramatic, just deliberate. Mason, please, we can fix this. He said, I'm not angry anymore. That calm again, it made me want to scream. Then why are you doing this? He said, Because I don't love the version of myself that forgives what you call jokes. The man in the grey jacket asked if I could sign receipt of service. My hands were shaking so hard that the pen slid off the line twice. I could hear camera shutters. Someone was taking photos. Maybe a passerby, maybe not. I said, You're making a mistake. He said, No, I'm correcting one. When I finally signed, the man thanked us both and left. Mason didn't move. I asked if he'd at least come home to talk. He said, Home's already separate. I said, You can't just erase years of us. He said, You already recorded over them. He walked away before I could say anything else. I stood there, clutching the envelope, surrounded by people moving around me as if I were invisible. I drove home in a daze. On the passenger seat, the papers slid out halfway, showing lines of text that blurred through my tears. At red lights, I caught my reflection in the window. Smudged makeup, blank stare. When I reached the apartment, the door was unlocked. Inside, the walls felt different, emptier. The shelves where his folders used to be were bare. The white mug was gone, his side of the wardrobe empty except for one hanger. On the kitchen counter sat a small USB drive, taped neatly to an envelope labeled for reference. I opened it. Inside were screenshots, dates, transcripts of messages, even timestamps of social media posts, everything. He'd catalogued it all. I wanted to tear it up, throw it out the window, but I couldn't. He'd been meticulous, precise, too calm to have done this overnight. I called him. No answer. I called Naomi. She said he was with Piper, that they were having lunch at the park. I told her she was taking his side. She said, I'm taking the side that makes sense. I shouted that he'd turned everyone against me. She said, You did that yourself when you let your ex walk you down the aisle. I hung up. The afternoon dragged. The apartment felt wrong, airless. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my feed again, but now the comments had turned brutal. Someone had posted a photo of the courthouse moment, me holding the envelope, Mason standing beside me. The caption read, When the joke finally ends. It already had hundreds of likes. I threw my phone on the couch and screamed. By evening, I'd made 3 more calls. Mason didn't answer any. Finally, I left a voicemail. You're not this kind of person. You're being cruel for the sake of an audience. You'll regret it. 5 minutes later, I got a text back. No, I'm being proper. You should try it. I wanted to go to the park, to find him, but something stopped me. Not pride, but shame. For the first time, I felt it like a physical weight. As the sun went down, I sat on the balcony with the envelope beside me. The city lights blurred through the glass. I flipped through the pages again, slower this time. Each section was methodical. Financial disclosures, property inventory, visitation schedule, all signed, all ready. At the back was one short paragraph written in his handwriting. This is not revenge, it's restoration. I hope one day she understands that dignity isn't drama. I read it twice, then 3 times. My vision blurred again. I went inside, turned on the printer out of instinct. It whirred to life, empty. I printed a blank page, just to hear the sound. The hum filled the room, familiar, steady, final. I realized then that he'd been teaching me something quietly all along. Every folder, every key, every note wasn't secrecy. It was preparation. He hadn't left in anger, he'd left in order. When my phone buzzed, I jumped. It was a text from Naomi. "Piper's with me tonight. Mason said he'll drop off some papers tomorrow for school arrangements." I typed back, "He already dropped off everything." Then I deleted it. I sat there for a long time, staring at the printer light blinking softly. I wanted to laugh, but my throat hurt. The next morning, a neighbor knocked, holding an envelope Mason had dropped off for me before leaving. Inside was the house key, only mine now. Attached was a note. "The silence is yours." I stood in the doorway, holding that single key, realizing I didn't even know what to do with quiet. Down the hall, someone's printer started up again, steady, distant, familiar, and I almost mistook it for ours. For a moment, I thought I heard his voice saying that last word again in my head, calm and unshakable. Properly. And then there was nothing else at all. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.